At the shelter, they called her simply Shadow. She arrived in late November, when the cold had already begun slipping beneath fur, and the wind howled as if searching for someone else to take from the streets. A black cat, dark as a moonless night, with wary yellow eyes, sat in the corner of a carrier and didn't make a single sound. No one knew where she had come from. The tag on her collar was gone. Only a scratch remained where it used to be. In her gaze lived caution that bordered on despair. But there was something else. The veterinarian, Marta, noticed it immediately. Shadow was pregnant. "Not far along," she said quietly, running her hand gently over the warm curve of the cat's belly. "But there are kittens, and she's scared." Scared was an understatement. Shadow wouldn't let anyone come too close. She ate only when the room was empty. At night, she could often be found by the window, staring into the darkness as if waiting for someone, or perhaps fearing that someone would come. The shelter staff had seen all kinds of stories. But there was something different about this cat. She wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't asking for affection. She was guarding, as if she already knew she wasn't alone anymore. A week passed. Her belly became more noticeable. Shadow chose her spot. The farthest corner of the isolation room, behind an old cabinet stacked with blankets. She dragged a piece of fleece there and built herself a nest. "She's preparing," Marta said. "Instinct." But every night something strange happened. The security camera recorded how Shadow would suddenly rise, tense up, and stare at the door. Her fur would stand on end, her tail stiffen. She would hiss softly at the empty air, as if memory returned in waves. One evening Marta stayed late. When she entered to check on the cat, Shadow didn't run. She sat in her nest and looked directly into the human's eyes, and for the first time, not with fear, but with warning. "I'm not going to take them from you," Marta whispered, crouching down. "I want to help." Shadow blinked slowly. In a cat's language, that means trust. A small step, almost invisible, but real. By the 4th week of pregnancy, something changed. Shadow started meowing, not loudly, not demanding, but every time someone passed the door, she let out a short sound, as if checking whether she was heard. Sometimes she even allowed Marta to touch her, for a few seconds. Then she would pull away again. But one morning, everything went wrong. When the staff member opened the room, Shadow didn't come to her bowl. She was lying in the nest, breathing heavily. Her eyes were wide open, and her body trembled. "Is it starting?" Marta whispered, her heart racing. But it was too early. The veterinarian examined her quickly. The kitten's heartbeats were weak. Too weak. "Stress," he said. Something frightened her. If this continues, she could lose them. That evening the shelter grew quiet earlier than usual. The lights were dimmed. An extra blanket was placed near the nest for warmth. Marta stayed beside her, working on her laptop, right there on the floor. And then it happened. A loud bang on the shelter door. Shadow shot upright. Her pupils widened. She began backing away, shielding her belly with her body. A man's voice echoed in the hallway, sharp, impatient. "I know she's here, the black cat. She's mine." Marta froze. Shadow's heart was beating so fast you could see it from across the room. "You're mistaken," the administrator replied coldly. "We have many animals. You'll need documentation." "I don't need documentation. She's just a cat." Just a cat. But in the room behind the cabinet, tiny lives were beating inside her. Shadow let out a low growl, a sound that carried more despair than aggression. She didn't try to run. She stayed in the nest, guarding. Marta quietly locked the room door from the inside. "I'm with you," she whispered. In the hallway, the man's voice grew louder. He demanded to see all the black cats. He said she was guilty, that she ran away, that he had the right. And then Shadow did something no one expected. She left the nest, slowly, carefully. With her rounded belly and trembling paws, she walked toward the door and sat in front of it, as if she knew. This time, hiding wasn't an option. Her eyes were no longer filled with fear alone. There was something else in them, determination. And when the door handle jerked from the outside, Shadow didn't retreat. She lifted her head, and quietly but clearly, she hissed. The door handle jerked again. Shadow didn't move. Her body trembled, but her paws pressed firmly against the floor, as if roots had grown through the concrete. Outside, the man's voice grew more aggressive. "I know she's here. She scratched me. She's dangerous." Dangerous. Marta looked at the cat. This was not a dangerous animal. This was a mother. "If you don't have documents, we can't help you," the administrator said firmly, "and there's no need to raise your voice." The man slammed his fist against the counter. At that moment, Shadow flinched sharply. Her belly tightened. Her breathing became uneven. Marta understood instantly. This wasn't just fear. It was contractions. No, not now," she whispered, kneeling beside her. It was still too early. If stress triggered premature labor, the kittens might not survive. Shadow let out a strained sound, closer to a gasp than a cry. She tried to return to her nest, but stopped halfway, as if the weight of responsibility had become heavier than her own body. Marta gently lifted her, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her back behind the cabinet. "I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." In the hallway, the administrator could be heard calling the police. The man kept shouting, accusing, insisting that the cat was his property. But in the nest behind the old cabinet, something more important than documents was being born. Trust. Half an hour passed. The voices faded. The man was escorted out. The shelter fell silent again, but in Shadow's room the silence felt thick, fragile. The cat lay on her side. Her eyes were no longer darting around the walls. They were fixed on Marta, and in them was a question. "It's okay," Marta said softly. "He won't come back." Was she completely sure? No. But Shadow didn't need certainty. She needed calm. And then something remarkable happened. The contractions stopped. Her breathing steadied. The tension in her belly eased. The kitten's heartbeats, checked again with a portable monitor, returned to a steady rhythm. "You did it," Marta whispered, barely holding back tears. "You're stronger than you think." Shadow slowly crawled closer, and for the first time, touched her nose to Marta's hand on her own. It was a moment no camera could truly capture. The instant when fear stops being in control. The following days were quiet. The shelter tightened security. The police confirmed that the man had no documentation proving ownership. He was warned. Still, Shadow listened to every sound. She no longer hid in the farthest corner. Now she lay where she could see the door, as if guarding not only her kittens, but the very space around them. Her belly grew quickly. By the 5th week, you could see faint movements beneath her skin. Tiny bodies shifting. Every evening Marta sat beside her, speaking softly. "You're almost a mom." And each time, Shadow listened. She no longer hissed. She allowed longer strokes. Sometimes she even purred, briefly, cautiously, as if she still wasn't used to the sound. But one morning everything shifted again. The shelter received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photograph, blurry, clearly taken with a phone. It showed Shadow before the shelter, thin, dirty, and pregnant. On the back a message, "She shouldn't have them." Marta felt a chill run down her spine. "This isn't random anymore," she whispered. Security was increased. Cameras were double-checked. Volunteers were told not to post any photos of the cat online. But the question remained, why? Why did someone want her back so badly? And why now? Shadow, as if sensing the human's tension, became even more alert. She rarely left the nest for long. Her body grew rounder, heavier. The time was approaching, and one night, as snow fell outside the window, she suddenly began meowing loudly. Not from fear, and not from pain. It was a call. Marta jumped from her chair and rushed over. Shadow looked directly at her. Then she lay down on her side. This time, it was real. But there was no panic, only determination. The first contraction was long, the second, stronger. Marta held her paw, counted seconds softly, spoke in a steady, soothing voice. "Breathe. You can do this, I'm here." And when the first thin, fragile squeak filled the room, Shadow froze. There was no fear in her eyes, only surprise, and something very much like hope. But suddenly, in the hallway, the exterior light flicked on. The security camera caught movement near the service entrance. Someone was standing at the door again. The light near the service entrance flickered once more. Marta froze. In the nest, Shadow tensed, but did not rise. She couldn't anymore. The contractions were stronger now, deeper, unstoppable. The first tiny bundle lay against her belly, wet, fragile, but alive. A small squeak pierced the silence, and at that very moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Not now. Please, not now," Marta whispered. She quickly called security without taking her eyes off the cat. On the camera screen, a silhouette stood outside the door. The figure didn't move, almost as if hesitating. Shadow lifted her head. Her gaze was no longer frantic. It was focused. She began licking her first kitten, slowly, carefully, as if the entire world had narrowed to this one small life. Another contraction, another cry, a second kitten. "You're doing amazing. You're a real mama." Marta's voice trembled, but she stayed steady. A soft knock sounded at the door. Not pounding, not rattling, just a knock. Marta cautiously moved toward the monitor. The silhouette raised both hands, showing they were empty. A minute later, security appeared on screen. It wasn't the man. It was an elderly woman in a thick winter coat. Snow clung to her shoulders. In her hands, she held a pet carrier. "I saw the notice about the black cat," she said quietly when they let her into the lobby. "I'm not here to take her. I came to help." Marta listened only halfway. Her heart was still in the room behind the cabinet. "I once had one just like her," the woman continued. "People feared her because of her color. But black cats don't bring bad luck. They bring strength." Another tiny cry. The third kitten arrived faster than expected. Shadow was no longer trembling. She worked instinctively, confidently, like a true mother. Outside, the wind howled, but in the small room there was warmth. Security checked the perimeter. No sign of the previous man, no threat nearby. The danger had retreated, and life continued. An hour later it was over. 4 kittens, 2 black, one with a white patch on its chest, and the smallest, a gray one, tiny but stubborn. Shadow lay exhausted, yet calm. She carefully pulled the kittens closer, listening to their squeaky breathing. Marta sat beside her, tears freely streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. Shadow slowly lifted her eyes. There was no fear left in them, only quiet pride and trust. She was no longer guarding the door. She was guarding the future. The next days brought a different kind of challenge. The newborns were fragile, especially the gray kitten. It struggled more than the others, gained weight slowly, and often needed help finding warmth and milk. Each day, Marta weighed them, recorded their progress, gently guiding the smallest one closer to its mother. And every time, Shadow allowed it. No hissing, no pulling away, only trust. The threatening letter never came again. Police traced the envelope to a false address. The man never returned. It was as if the darkness that had followed Shadow lost its power the moment she stopped hiding. Because fear feeds on running, and she stayed, and she won. 6 weeks later, the kittens were wobbling across the room on unsteady paws. The tiny gray one, the weakest at birth, turned out to be the bravest. It was the first to climb out of the nest, the first to explore the water bowl, the first to fall asleep in Marta's hands. Shadow watched. She no longer flinched at every sound. She often sat by the window, gazing at the falling snow in peaceful silence. And then one day, something happened that everyone had quietly hoped for. She walked to the door, but not to guard it. She simply sat beside Marta as she opened it for a young couple who had come to meet the kittens. The couple knelt down, smiling at the tiny black fur balls. "They're incredible," the woman whispered. "And their mom, she's so strong." Marta smiled softly. "Yes, she's been through a lot." Shadow slowly approached the couple and allowed them to stroke her, without fear, without tension. She was no longer just Shadow. She had become light for 4 tiny hearts, and for everyone who believed that even after darkness, new life can be born. Sometimes strength isn't a roar or sharp claws. Sometimes strength is staying when you're afraid, and protecting those who cannot yet see the world. If this story touched you, remember, behind every cautious animal may stand a history of pain and extraordinary love. And maybe, somewhere in a nearby shelter, someone is waiting, not for rescue, but for a chance.